Welcome to Freedom Motivated with Christina Whiteley, the podcast that empowers you to live life on your terms. Are you uninspired, bored, and unhappy with where life has taken you, and yearning for a life filled with purpose and passion? Look no further. We are here to ignite that fire within, to awaken your true potential, and to guide you on a journey towards absolute freedom. Join us as we delve into the minds of incredible entrepreneurs and freedom leaders from very different backgrounds with incredible stories. Be inspired by their resilience and learn from their challenges they faced along the path to success. These are the brave individuals who fight every day to awaken people to the power of self-responsibility and who inspire them to create a life they are absolutely in love with. Each episode will explore the concept of conscious income creation, building a business or creating a career that aligns with your unique skill set, purpose, values, and belief system. Discover the strategies, tips, and invaluable insights shared by our guests as they guide you towards making a living doing what you love. It's time to break free from the shackles of conformity and embrace the freedom that awaits. Are you ready to take control of your life? Are you ready to step into the life you've always dreamed of? Then welcome to Freedom Motivated, the podcast that will ignite your spirit and unleash your potential. Hello, my friends. I am so freaking excited for this conversation. Those of you that follow along, you know that I take parenting just as seriously as I take business. It's actually one of the things that I really, truly feel called to do in this lifetime is like raise good kids, raise positive kids, confident kids that'll go out and make a mark in this world, that'll go out and make a difference, you know? And so I'm so excited to have Jess Hartwell here. We've connected through a mom's group on Vancouver Island, which I love and I've come to embrace. They've really been an incredible community. And Jess and I were just speaking the other day, and she was telling me a little bit more about what she does. And I was like, we need to have this conversation online. Like, would you be open to being on my podcast? Because I think that so often we look at parenting as just part of the process, right? We go to school, we get married, we buy a house, we have kids, we retire, you know, and that's just kind of like the way of things that just kind of happen in our lifetime, right? And if we don't go through it consciously, then we end up repeating the same thing that happened in generations before. We end up repeating the same habits. Like I definitely have had those moments that I'm like, oh my God, I sound like my mother, or oh my God, I sound like my father, or oh my God, you know, like you have these like instant realizations. And so I always knew that I wanted to be a conscious parent. Actually, it's so funny, Jess, I read 3 books before I got my first dog. I read 1 book before I had a baby. And that 1 book was The Conscious Parent. And it really made me realize it was like this huge awakening to me that like, although our job is to be a role model for our kids, and to teach them strong beliefs and values and all that kind of stuff to help them, you know, become the humans required to make good and bad decisions. There's also another element to that in that, you know, we have to be really conscious of who these little beings are and value them for who they are and who they're becoming. And sometimes that can be really difficult because of our past, from things that have been passed on from generation to generation and the trauma that we face. And so, Jess, I'm so excited for this conversation and to share it because I think it's such a valuable piece of parenting. And so I'm so excited for you to just share a little bit about you, why this became something that you stand for and something that you constantly teach other people and help them with, and how, you know, we're going to evolve this conversation into how it's changed, you know, not only your life, but many people around you, and just how we can see a different perspective when it comes to parenting, and even some of those tough moments when you just want to rip your hair out, because that also happens.
For
right?
sure.
So Jess, without further ado, please introduce yourself and share a little bit about you and how we got here.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me on here. I'm so grateful to share this discussion with you. So, you know, my story is like a lot of ours. I grew up in a home that there was no emotional availability. There was a lot of, you know, people can only parent at the level of consciousness that they've come to, right? And so our generation and our parents' generation didn't have kind of the toolbox that we have now currently and access to information. And so this is not to shame our parents in any way. They definitely did the best that they could, but I was definitely raised in an environment where I wasn't taught emotional regulation. There wasn't a lot of support for, you know, challenges or emotional struggles. And so as I entered into adulthood and kind of realized I I really don't have the skills to navigate this. It became really clear to me, my mission in life was always to be a mother. And it became very clear to me that if I was going to be the type of mother that really felt fulfilled, I had a lot of work to do. I had a lot to unpack. And so I spent a lot of years doing really deep therapy work. EMDR, talk therapy, the
Yeah.
works,
Mhm.
getting into the nitty-gritty of why my patterns were the way they were and how I was interacting with people and what my triggers were. And it just led me into a life of working with people on this same path. And so I spent a decade traveling the world. And when I came back, I started working as a behavior interventionist. So working with children with neurodiversities, autism, FAS, ADHD. And the thing that really became apparent to me early on in the work was that actually wasn't the children's behaviors that we needed to modify. It,
Ouch, right?
yeah, it's a doozy, especially it can be hard to accept as a parent. Hold on, this is my work. But unfortunately that is essentially the truth. And when we start looking into it, it does become more apparent. And so my work shifted into working directly with parents who were interested in exploring that on a deeper level, and watching how much impact you can make when you start to allow somebody to heal these deeper traumas and you support that space for them. I find that just so fulfilling and exciting to think of how many generations before and how many generations after are being impacted by one person's bravery and courage to
Yeah.
look at all of that.
That is such a beautiful thought process. And you know what? I'm so glad you said this. It's not about shaming our parents or saying we didn't have a great upbringing. It has nothing to do with that, because what I've learned in my adulthood is like we only do the best with what we've got, right?
Yes.
Not everybody has been exposed to the deep work, the personal development, the counseling. Like you mentioned EMDR. EMDR changed my life. I didn't know that I lived with PTSD until I was 32 and had a trigger that happened and I couldn't get out of bed and something was wrong, right? And so I went and I had to like go rehash all of these other memories and moments in my life because it wasn't the one trigger, it was all of the past stuff. And that's when I really had this huge understanding for my inner child, for like healing that piece of me that you can hold so much resentment, like, well, I was raised this way, and this happened to me. And by the way, it could be like really tiny little things in your life, like one sentence. And I think that's what freaked me out in the beginning, right? Is that I realized, okay, this one sentence when I was 5, where my dad was probably having a bad day and I didn't put the dishwasher together correctly when I was putting the dishes away. And he's like, that's so, like, he got mad, right? Like he got mad that I didn't correctly load the dishwasher. And I, like, since that moment on, I never felt good enough. Right. And so it was like such a stupid little thing that like could happen. And so I remember starting to realize these things and the massive impact we have on the rest of our kids' lives. And then I started getting fearful. Then I was like, oh
Right.
my God, I'm going to screw up this kid. I'm going to, like, just because of my personality and how I show up, like, if I don't do the work, if I don't change who I am and how I parent, I'm going to screw this kid up. And my counselor was so great. She's like, you're not going to screw up. Actually, we all screw our kids up. But like, this is the fact that you are even available for this conversation and you're aware of this conversation and can work through it. That means that you're in a really good place, right? So like,
Right.
that's why I think that conversations like this are so important. It's like you may be having a hard time with your kids right now at different stages of your kids' lives, but like if you have bigger conversations and are willing to do some self-reflection in the process, those conversations can end a lot differently than they would before if you weren't aware of having the conversation. So do you want to talk a little
Yes.
bit about how you help families and like how the work that you're doing right now has really changed your perspective over time, right? But also changed people around you as you start to work with them and integrate into their family life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I realized as a behavior interventionist that my impact was going to be pretty small. So I was working with the children, but the environment they were living in wasn't changing. And so I could do a bit there to empower them, increase their self-worth, help inspire them to be able to communicate their needs. But ultimately, it comes back to the environment that they're in and whether or not that's an environment they can thrive in. So when I started kind of shifting my goals in working towards private coaching, what I realized was I attracted parents who already had that level of awareness that you're speaking of, right?
Yeah.
That hold on, this might be deeper than just my child's hitting. So, part of my work is really understanding the overarching dynamics that families are working with. So what the behaviors are, what kind of partnerships are involved, sibling relationships, getting an overarching understanding of the family dynamic. And then, obviously building that trust, because if we're going to start looking at your deeper triggers and your deeper wounding and it tends to originate in a lack of self-worth.
Yes.
You need to feel really safe with me, right? And
Yeah.
so that's a huge part of my work is developing that trust with people. And then once that trust is there, there's an open space to just dialogue, right? And we can talk and we can get into the nitty-gritty without there being shame or blame or even fear, because you know what? The fact that we're looking at it, that's the leading edge.
Yes.
We're already there.
Yeah.
We're already miles ahead. So we're starting from a place of being miles ahead. Let's take that and let's really understand how we can shift some of our things, reframe some of our thinking about our child, and redirect the awareness back into our own behaviors. Because what it essentially boils down to is if we are dysregulated, we will see that reflected in our children.
Yeah.
And how can we possibly expect these little beings to perform in a more conscious way than they're being modeled?
Yeah.
Right. So it's very much about increasing that awareness and increasing that willingness to look at what's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so like, I would love to, if it's okay with you, I'd love to like kind of take an example, because I know that a lot of parents get triggered when their kids have tantrums, right? So like they have a tantrum, they're upset about something. And what do? We get mad at them and say, no, go to your room, or no, you can't behave that way, or you can't have that big emotion that you can't handle right now. You need to stop that, right? Because I'm from the generation, I don't know if you're from the generation, it kind of sounds like it, but like, it sounds like your parents were a little bit like mine, but that you're to be seen and not heard, and quit your crying or I'll give you something to cry about, right? Like that was like very common for our parents and their parents, And so like, I would love to like kind of just give an example of how that looks if you're parenting consciously and understanding that what is actually happening in that situation.
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. And I mean, it's so common. And so what I really do is what parents will do is they'll come and they'll say, my child just won't stop tantruming and it's so annoying and it's loud and it's awful and it disrupts the whole family. And it's like, okay, so number one, that tantrum, there is no child in the world who wants to feel dysregulated, unsafe, and out of control. They have tried to seek connection in other ways prior, and it has not been met. And now they're out of their toolbox. They're in their limbic brain. This is also very developmental, and they're exploding. Okay. So now we have kind of two choices, right? We can bring stillness and awareness and presence into our being. That can, depending on where you're at in your parenting journey, be a few deep breaths or a pause, or maybe it isn't accessible, but this is the goal. We can bring some presence in and actually see this being from a place of a grounded, present adult, not our wounded inner child. And when we can meet that child from a place of a grounded adult energy, that child will soften. So if we can just bring ourselves down to their level and validate, you seem really upset. Yeah, these are big feelings, and big feelings can feel really uncomfortable. Hey, I'm here with you. You're safe. What happens, and often within seconds, is that child now has the connection they were originally seeking. They feel seen, they feel validated, and they feel heard. The tantrum will soften. They'll come out of a limbic brain patterning. And then once that energy shifts, you can have a dialogue. Hey, what was that about for you? And it could have been, you didn't buy me the toy at the store or whatever
Sure.
It doesn't really matter what the input was. And then you can even further deepen that connection, right? What we do as parents is we actually meet them with our inner child who wasn't heard, who was sent to our room, who was shamed, who was told we're too sensitive, who was told to get over it. And we're like, well, why should I support you? I wasn't supported.
Right. And that's what's going through subconsciously your whole body at the time.
entirely.
Hmm.
And because of that, if you're not able to realize that in the moment and shift into grounded presence of your adult self, we meet them with another 5-year-old. Well, I don't know how we expect this to neutralize the conflict. It's what that child needs is an adult who's reparented themselves and is able to show up as a grounded individual, not another child to join their chaos. I always say, like, we have two choices. We can join the storm and add waves, and sometimes we do, right? And then that's our journey. Or we can be the light that shines and just hold some warmth for them to just release. And that comes back to doing the work around our own triggers so that we aren't triggered from their behavior.
I find it so fascinating. It was a few years back where, one of the things that I had done for many, many years was use hard work as a badge of honor. I'm like, I will outwork everyone to the point of my detriment, to the point of like lack of sleep, lack of nutrition, lack of exercise, lack of all those things, right? And somebody actually had to say to me, you need to take a time out. You need to take a week off, a time out, not talk to anybody, go into nature and just take a time out. And then when I came back, I'm so grateful for mentors by this, like this, by the way. And they said, okay, now because nobody's taught you, you're 36 years old, nobody's taught you how to manage these feelings, how to work through these feelings, how to find the truth in it all, and how to adjust course. We don't want to get to that point of like absolute dismay and explosion of like, I can't handle life anymore. We want to learn the tools and the tricks to do that. And there was this like moment of, oh my God, the light bulb went on. So at the time, my daughter was going through this phase where if she didn't get what she wanted at the store, she'd be upset. And I would like deep yoga breathe for a long time, but I would still feel that anger, like that like frustration inside of me. And then I'm like, she doesn't have the tools. She doesn't have the
Right.
communication. She doesn't have, when she gets angry, she doesn't know how to handle that. And so I went out and I bought a book for her. And I said, there are things that you can do when you get upset. You can tap and count to 100. You can go for a run. You can scream in a pillow if you want to get that energy out, however you want. And you get to pick any of those. You can pick whatever one you want, but we're going to go through those feelings, those anger feelings, or those emotional feelings. And I'm going to be here to support you in that, right? Like, I want to be here so that you can come to me and talk to me. And sure, there are going to be moments when you screw up as a parent and you're just like, oh, we're out, stop doing that, right? Like, you're, and this embarrassment comes and you just realize they're at a different stage and their stages change all the time. And it's our job as parents to adapt to each stage and teach at that level or to embrace at that level, right? And so
Right.
as we go through these moments, what are some of the things that parents recognize in themselves? Like, what are the things that you see most common that parents are like, oh man, I didn't realize I did that, or I didn't realize I reacted that way because of this?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that I notice quite commonly is that people don't actually realize what they're modeling. So if you are, constantly fighting with your partner, if you're melting down, if you're creating chaos, this is, our children are how we speak to our children becomes their inner voice.
Yeah.
And so when you can start to become aware of your own behaviors, we start to have more compassion for the behaviors of these we beings,
Yeah.
right? I mean, how can you expect a child to know better when you yourself in your 30s or 40s cannot exhibit that? And
Right.
so as we shift that, it actually softens our hearts towards our children's difficult behaviors because we form narratives. Oh, the difficult child, the challenging child, how, we create these storylines around our children that they feel. They feel that children are very sensitive. They feel that. And then quite frankly, they reflect it right back to you in their behaviors. And so because children are mirrors, if we're in tune and we're aware, we're actually able to really watch our children's behaviors and then go, okay, how am I actually presenting that? How am I walking in this world and demonstrating that which they are now enacting? And it gives us some empowerment to be able to go, hold on, this is something I can actually adjust. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're
Yeah.
yelling at them every second they spill the milk or do something wrong, why are we expecting them not to yell at us when we do something they don't like? It's
Yeah.
simple, right?
Yeah. And to also take, take the time to explain things. I know that I used to get in trouble a lot when I was a kid. I was always kind of a big personality, really loud, always doing something I probably shouldn't be doing. But it was like so interesting because I see these behaviors in my daughter of her like pushing boundaries, and kids pushing boundaries is them simply learning, right? Like that's all that
100%.
it is. I love Jordan Peterson says, kids sharpen their teeth on the bones of their parents.
Right.
And I'm like, that
Right.
is so true, right? But I
Mm.
think that sometimes it just takes, and sometimes it's yoga breathing, sometimes it's taking a time out, but sometimes it's also taking the extra time to get curious
Yes.
about why your kids do something. Izzy came home and she'd drawn ink all over her hands, and I'm like, why? Hey, I'm just, instead of being mad and like, go wash that off, right? Hey, why are you doing that? Why did you decide to do that? Well, tell me a little bit more. And then, educate them on maybe why they don't want to have ink all over their skin, or like why they don't want to choose chips at lunch or a popsicle at lunch when, like we noticed that she was taking some pesos to go to school and then go to the cafeteria, and then she wouldn't eat her lunch. And we're like, okay, well, like we understand these things, but we also need to teach you about nutrition now. And we need to teach you like healthy choices. And sometimes when you have these other foods, your behavior changes because the sugar inside of you doesn't act well with your anatomy because it's not healthy food. And so
Right.
it's having bigger conversations, and realizing that our kids, they know a heck of a lot more and they understand a heck of a lot more than we give them credit for.
100%. 100%. And it's also about mutual respect. So it's
Yeah.
shifting that narrative that kids are below us and that we are the guides. And it's actually flipping it and going, many wise teachers say the fastest path to enlightenment is parenthood, because you
That's
either
so
deal with
true.
your stuff or you don't, right? Um, so it's that kind of concept of how can I meet this human being as their own autonomous being who came here on their own life
Yes.
journey with their
Yep.
own lessons to learn and their own path that isn't the same as ours. How can I meet them there? Passion and acceptance, right? And I mean, if they're, like you say, if they're tick tick tick, it also shows a level of safety. They feel safe enough to challenge us, to be able to have that polarity, to be able to feed off of and learn and grow from. That's an honor. That's an
Yeah.
honor,
Yeah,
right?
to have that kind of safe environment where they feel that they can behave that way. Because I know I certainly wouldn't behave some of the ways because that wasn't safe for me to behave that way.
Exactly.
Right. And so that's a
Mm-hmm.
really great perspective. And I'm really glad that you shared it. One of the things, so we're in Mexico, and if I was in Canada or in the United States, I would absolutely homeschool my child. I tried 6 weeks of that, and she just looked at me and she said no. Like I have a very strong-willed child, and I'm thrilled about that, by the way. Like it makes parenting a little bit more difficult, but as she grows, as she matures, I'm so grateful she has that piece of me in her. And I see that reflected, that I'm like, oh yeah, now I get it. Now I get the, the combativeness when I was a kid or as a teenager. And I even can recognize it and be like, okay, well, this will make it easier for me to understand as she grows. And we put her in this school. I don't know if you've ever heard of an IB school. It was initially
Yeah.
created, right, for Swiss diplomats kids, and it teaches them conceptually, and it teaches them how to question everything and problem solve and think of the big picture.
Mm.
And so we went in and did this tour of the school, and the principal goes, we really love how kids are worldly thinkers and they think about all the stuff. And he's like, we will tell you, in your teenage years, this will make things a lot more difficult for you as a parent, because they will have valid arguments, they will have valid disagreements, they will have valid feelings and concerns and opinions that you are going to have to contribute to and navigate as a parent. So like, we'll tell you that now because this is how this, and I'm like, hey man, if you can give her those tools now as a kid, can you imagine if we had those tools when we were a kid, right? And it
Well,
only
so
takes
many of us
one.
were silenced. We were
Exactly.
silenced. And
Yeah.
so the gift that we're giving our child is saying, actually, your voice matters. And
Yes.
I am strong enough to be able to hear it. There's courage in that. I think it's great that you're doing that. I also homeschooled until I moved to a remote island with a different option. And it comes back to, who is this unique individual and how can I foster their path, right? And if we have a child who talks back and whatnot, I'd like to encourage reframing that to, this is a child who has a powerful voice and things that need to be heard,
Yeah.
right? Like, great. We need more of those people. We need people willing to
Yeah.
rise up and say, this isn't a popular opinion, but this is it. We need those beings on our planet. And in order to foster that, we're their first person they're trying it out on, right?
Totally. And in a way that is constructive, right? Because I can
Yes.
definitely see the difference between people who have healed their trauma or kids who have gone through and not healed their trauma. And they're out there protesting and screaming and yelling and just trying to be heard because they were never heard their whole life. And I mean, we look at what's going on in the world and the polarization and the division that's happening. And a part of that comes from people just wanting to have a voice that they never had before. So if we can
Totally.
honor our kids and their voices, regardless of if they're on the same page as us or not, right? I had Izzy ask me this morning, she's like, how come we don't live in Canada? And I said, why did you ask that question? Right? Like, I want to know why you're asking. And she's like, well, because we lived there for a while and now we're in Mexico. And I said, because I kind of like going on family adventures and experiencing different cultures and different foods. And I love the weather here and you get to go swimming all the time. And it's a lot of fun for me and dad. But I just want you to know you always have a voice. If there's something that you want, then we're going to do what's best for us as a whole, as a family. And you're always open. She's like, nah, I like it here. I'm fine. But I just wondered why, why don't, and I'm like, and so if you have that, like if I had that trigger of being like, I don't want to move back there, you're a kid, right? We don't want to have this conversation. That conversation would have ended so much more differently than we getting curious about having a bigger conversation. You know what I mean? And so I really appreciate how you talk about reframing things and how you talk about the bigger picture and kind of sometimes taking yourself out of it. So would you be able to share a couple of like different tools that parents can use in that moment? Because I know when I'm being triggered, I instantly go from this tone of voice to like a 10, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm like,
Right.
I'm going to just need a timeout right now so I can just manage my feelings and figure out what the root cause of this is. But like, what are some really great tools for parents when they're realizing that they're getting really frustrated with their kids or they dislike their children's behavior, right? One of the things that you talked about was they're just seeking connection. They're seeking they want their voice to be heard, right? But what can you tell parents out there that are listening to this and be like, oh my God, I so struggle with my kid?
Yeah, one of the tools that I think is the most potent is being honest. And our kids can handle that as I mean, being honest to the level where it's still
Sure.
respectful. So
Yeah.
saying something like, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. I need a few minutes to calm my body and I'll be back. Okay. I actually do that quite a bit. That's a process that I use of I'm not grounded right now. I'm going to go take that time, because then what we're modeling is that it's actually okay to not respond in the moment. Now, a lot of times what our kids are really requiring is co-regulation. So we have to be honest with ourselves. Am I in a present, calm, grounded space that I can offer that co-regulative offer? If not, your co-regulation is going to be dysregulating. So it's your responsibility as a parent to take that 1 second to go, am I able to support this or not? If the answer is no, honor yourself, but communicate that with your child. I want to be there for you. I'm not calm right now. I'm going to take a few deep breaths. When I'm calm, I'm going to come right back. Because what that does is it shows your child that it's okay to not have everything figured out. It's okay to need a moment to navigate your own thoughts and your own emotional
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
And that there's communication and respect. I'm not leaving you. There's no abandonment happening here. You're not alone in this. I'm going to get myself to a place where I can support you and I'll be right back. So that's something I'd really encourage parents, especially parents who go straight to yelling. If that's your kind of go-to way of coping, that's a key sign that you are no longer regulated and you cannot regulate somebody from a state of dysregulation. So, I'm also a yoga instructor, meditation instructor. I believe in the power of meditating daily. I believe in this strongly. It's something that I encourage everyone to look into and see if it resonates for you, because what it does is it stills the reactive process and it brings you into presence. And when you're in presence, you're not triggered because you see things as they are instead of through the lens of your wounded inner child. So if so a daily meditation practice, but in the moment, if things are happening, that honesty piece of where you're at, And communicating with your kid, right? Like, these children are wise. They are coming into our planet with wisdom.
Oh,
Let's be
are they ever?
vulnerable. Yeah, they are, more wisdom than us. And so let's model what it looks like to work through things so that they can learn how to do the same, so that they can be like, I'm dysregulated, I need a minute, I'm going to take a minute. And now my children will actually say that, I'm not regulated, mom. My kids are 5 and 7. I'm not regulated, I need a minute before I can have this conversation. And they learned that from
From
me
you.
doing that with
Yeah.
them. The other option, if it feels accessible, and this is something that's really beautiful when you can shift into this, just drop your own needs in that moment and hold your child. Open your heart, bring their heart close to yours. There's no talking necessary. There's no explanation necessary. Co-regulate on that physical level until their energy has subsided. And then you can go into a more rational discussion. And then you can go and take that later on your own and evaluate, like, if that was hard for you, what that brought up for you around not having those needs met as a child yourself. And you can do that work independently of their needing you, right?
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, those are some tangible ways. But I mean, everything's easier said than done when you're in that moment. And so it does always come back to doing that deeper work around actually healing those things so it no longer triggers you, period.
Yeah. And I think, often we tell our kids what to do and they're not listening to everything they say. They're watching everything that we do.
That's
And I
it.
think that the job of us as parents is to be a role model for our kids. Just like you were saying, like teach them how you behave. If you're always fighting with your partner, if you're always talking badly about other people, if you're always complaining about the world and everything that's happening, guess what? They're going to do the exact same thing. And some of the times, my husband and I will get into heated discussions. I call them discussions because they're not arguments. We're not like screaming at each other, but our voices are a bit raised. And Izzy, she's so like, these kids have so much more knowledge than we do. And she's like, Mom, I don't like that you're getting upset right now. And I said, I understand, but I also want to show you that I love your dad. We can have conversations like this. We'll sort it out between the two of us and we'll have a bigger conversation around it and we'll work through it. And we still really, really love each other. And I want to show her that
Yes.
that's okay. It's okay when those things happen, right? And I think the other piece of it is, as a parent, to give yourself grace, right? We're not perfect. We're human beings. We make mistakes all the time. We have our own filters on through our life, through our experience, through how we were raised, all of these things. And so in those moments where we screw up, because it is inevitable that you will screw up, okay?
Like,
That, you give yourself some grace and reflect upon it and think, how could I have fixed the situation, or how could I have behaved differently in this situation where I would have had a different result, right? And I often, when Izzy gets upset, I often say to her, do you need a hug or do you need a time to yourself? What is it that you need right now? If you need a hug, I'm here to hug you. Can I hug you? And she'll say no. And she'll go to her room and close the door. And I'm like, okay, she needs a
yeah.
couple of minutes. And what's fascinating to me is like watching the progression of our kids, right? Like when I got upset with somebody as an adult, like in the beginning, I'd be angry at them for a year and not speak to them, right? Like, or I'd be angry at them for a couple of weeks, or I just like, right? But like to watch her go from 10 minutes of being angry to being back at base level to 7 minutes to 5 minutes to 3 minutes. I'm just like, there's so much to learn from our kids. And I mean, we can do the same thing. We can heal those pieces of us that are triggered and realize that there are so many extenuating circumstances that are going on out there that we could behave a certain way towards. But instead, why don't we just operate in a place of love and understanding and passion for our kids and be able to help them through this stuff, right? I think that's so
Totally.
powerful.
Totally. And I mean, that's what our kids are looking for, is that feedback. You will definitely find that as you soften from trying to control your child's behavior and you shift that to managing your own reactions, that you see that direct reflection in your child's behavior play out, right?
Yeah.
And what I find is once you start seeing that, it becomes easier to do that work, because it's, your counselor was right. In that we all damage our kids. I would word it differently. I would say we all armor our children,
Sure.
and
I
our
like that
children are,
better.
Yeah, it sounds better. It feels lighter for me. But we armor them because the realism is they are going to go out into a world that might not meet them with the same compassion and gentleness that we would like to meet them with. And so they do need to have some capacity to cope with that. Now, that's the grace piece, right? Of it's okay for me to make mistakes. How am I modeling repair? Because
Yes.
that's what it also
Yes.
comes back to. If you yell at your child, okay, like the moment is over. So you can continue to beat yourself up about that and then be in suffering. That's your choice. Or you can shift it and you can come back to your child and take accountability. I
Yeah.
raised my voice at you. That must have felt really scary.
Yeah.
I was reacting instead of being present with you. I'm really sorry. You really don't deserve to be spoken to like that. And what I'm going to do in the future is when I feel that rising, I'm going to take a few minutes so that I can address you in a way that respects you. So when they go out into the world, they have that self-worth and knowing, hey, I don't actually deserve to be disrespected, but I'm not going to explode and it's not going to be this big crisis in my life. I'm just going to express my worth and move forward, right? So it's a whole conversation around empowering our children with self-worth, and how we do that is truly by finding our own. And if
Yeah.
you have CPTSD, like complex post-traumatic
Yeah.
stress disorder, you likely have low self-worth, negative self-talk. There's an inner narration that's actually quite abusive. And in order to meet our children with any level of presence, we need to be looking at that. Because how are we treating ourselves? We can only meet others as deeply as we've met ourselves.
Yeah.
So if your child is pulling for connection, it's a reflection for that you need to deeper connect with yourself. Take off some of these layers, soften, right? It's a deeper conversation. It's like we could talk for hours about it because there's just so much to unpeel, right?
Absolutely. But the work does start with you, right?
It
Instead of
does.
looking at a bad behavior for your kid or something that you dislike or something, by the way, usually you'll see in your kids things that you dislike, but that's something you see in yourself, actually. That's right.
Right.
Something that triggers in you, and that's why you dislike it. That goes for friends, that goes for people in your life, that sometimes goes with your partner, right? Like you see something in them and you're like, oh, wait a second, that's something about me that I don't like, or something about me that I've internalized and seen as a truth that isn't a truth. And so I really appreciate this higher level conversation. I'll make sure to have you back, Jess. But just before I let you go, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you if they want to have a bigger conversation
Yeah.
about this?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. So I've never actually had to develop any sort of business. I've always had a wait list because of, I guess, just, word of
Life.
mouth. So I am finally launching a business because I want to reach more people. I want to have a bigger impact. So the website's under development. So that's wisewillowcollective.com, or emailing at info@wisewillowcollective.com. And yeah, you're more than welcome to tag me on this video, or I can, keep an eye on the video and answer questions and that kind of thing. But definitely open to working with people ready to do the deep work for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and having this very much needed conversation. I really appreciate you. I appreciate how you show up and how you help people. And I look forward to getting to know you even better. So have an awesome afternoon, my friend. Thank you
You
guys for
too.
tuning in to my podcast, Freedom Motivated. I'm so excited that you're here. If you got some value out of this podcast, make sure that you share it with a friend, family member, somebody that you know would get value out of it too. And we'll see you again next time. Bye for now. Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of Freedom Motivated with your host, me, Christina Whiteley. We hope that the stories we've shared today have sparked a fire within you and ignited your passion for living life on your terms. Remember, true freedom lies in the choices we make and the actions we take. So go out there and embrace your journey. Take the leap of faith, believe in yourself, and never settle for less than what you deserve. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the Freedom Motivated podcast and never miss out on our upcoming interviews with more incredible entrepreneurs and freedom leaders. Be bold, be brave, be disruptive. You are capable of things far beyond your wildest dreams if you just have the courage to go for it. Thank you for being a part of this incredible community. Until next time, may you always be driven by the desire for freedom and motivated to make your dreams a reality.